Welcome to today's Tuesday Topic. My name is Derek Dunson. I'm the producer of the Tuesday Topic series for the College of Nursing and Health Professions. Today we have conducting high quality peer reviews, where to start. While we're waiting for a few more folks to join us, both online and in the room, just going to plug the next Tuesday topic, which is peer review survival skills tips for researchers, which will be on Tuesday, February the 25th, also from 12 to 1 right here in this room. And I've got another one scheduled for March 11th, which is going to be part of our Ethically Speaking series, also on peer review. So we're doing a peer review quarter to warm your hearts in these cold, cold days. So let me invite Dr. Yoka Brat, who is the director of our PhD Directors Council and the director of the PhD in Creative Arts Therapies, to the stage to come on up and talk to us about conducting high quality peer reviews and where to start. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Welcome all, and welcome to the folks online. So I'm presenting this topic or workshop today based on my experience as an editor-in-chief for a journal, a music therapy journal, an international journal, and also as a member of several editorial boards where I have the preview either as in early in my career as associate editor, then editor-in-chief, where I had the luxury to see both sides. I was able to see the peer reviews come in, and I was also able to see how people respond to the peer reviews, and then how the peer reviewers respond to the response to the peer review, right? So we will have two Tuesday topics. Today will be from the perspective of the peer reviewer. Yeah. So if you are invited to do a peer review, how can you do a good job and make sure that your work will result in a better quality manuscript? Yeah. And then the next Tuesday topic will be from the opposite perspective, you as authors. How do you deal with the review critiques that you might receive? All right. So just as a quick overview, journals, of course, rely on peer reviewers to ensure that they publish high quality articles, but they also rely on peer reviewers for gatekeeping, to make sure that things that really shouldn't be published because they in my world, in music therapy, for example, are claiming to be researching, let's say, a particular music therapy practice, while in reality, what they're presenting, the intervention they are presenting, really isn't music therapy. Yeah, and I'm sure you probably see examples of that in your own fields, where you see an intervention published that is actually quite questionable or unethical or whatever it might be. Typically, journals will invite 2 to 3 reviewers to review a manuscript, and most journals will require that reviewers have a PhD degree, although they will at times allow PhD students, so students in training, to act as a peer reviewer, sometimes with mentoring of an advisor or of somebody from the editorial board. Before the manuscript reaches the reviewers, please know that an editor has already completed an initial review just to check whether it's even worthy of peer review. However, that does not mean that you should think, oh, this editor did a careful read of this manuscript, decided it's good enough for peer review, so now it should be accepted. Yeah, or I shouldn't be too critical. Absolutely not. Yeah. As an editor, we don't make initial decisions about reject or accept unless the manuscript is a really, really, really poor quality or doesn't meet the mission of the journal. Yeah. So never be afraid to be critical of a manuscript. And then as a reviewer, you can be invited as a guest reviewer or ad hoc reviewer, right? And hopefully you have started to receive invitations like that. And then it's up to you whether you want to accept those or not. However, you might also be a member of an editorial board or of a journal's advisory board. And then you are kind of expected to accept their invitations. Not all of them. I'm on several editorial boards, and at times I have to say no because I already said yes to two other ones, a manuscript that particular week. But in general, it's expected that you are going to be more frequently accepting than rejecting invitations or journals that you serve on the editorial board. Okay. So a very important question to consider is, what's in it for you? Yeah, I talked briefly about the gatekeeping and kind of influencing maybe even what's getting published, but what is really in it for you? Because doing a peer review of a manuscript takes a lot of time. And as journals, I can tell you it's becoming harder and harder to find willing reviewers. So it's not just thinking about time commitment. Oh, I'm going to be spending 2 or 3 hours of time on this, and I don't sure if that's what I want to do. Maybe I'll prefer to go running for 2 or 3 hours than doing this. So carefully consider what's in it for you. And I think there's some really important benefits. One is that you can stay up to date to very current literature, because you would assume that the authors have, reviewed the literature and did a careful analysis of the research gaps. It might also help challenge your current thinking or perspectives on a particular phenomenon. You can learn from others how they approach the research problem. What design did they use? What kind of outcome measures are they considering? It also can tremendously enhance your reporting skills. You learn so much from doing peer reviews, especially because you typically will get to see the peer reviews of other peer reviewers as well once a decision is made on the manuscript. So then you can see, what are other people critical of, or what do they like, what don't they like, what can I learn from this, what did I miss, how come I didn't think about critiquing this particular aspect or taking a close look at this particular aspect of the manuscript. You can also be included then in the journal's list of reviewers. Yeah, and so you can include that in, let's say, when you go for an annual review as a faculty member. Yeah, you can show the work that you have done, and this is often counts as service, of course, once you are a faculty member. And many publishers will give you a token of appreciation. It might be a reduced rate to access manuscripts, to articles. You might get reduced rates to books published by the same publishers. Yeah, so more and more publishers are trying to give those kind of tokens of appreciation. All right, so here comes the email in your inbox inviting you to make a decision to accept, inviting you to review a manuscript, and now you need to make a decision to accept or not. The first thing to consider is, read the abstract and make a decision just based on the abstract. Do I have the needed expertise or not? If you don't, do not accept it. It's not fair to the authors, and it doesn't do the journal service either. Think also about the type of journal. Is this a low versus high impact journal? Of course, as you start your career as peer reviewer, if this is your first or second invitation, I would say really accept an invitation, get your feet wet in the peer review practice. But you'll see that very quickly once you are a peer reviewer for a journal, and then therefore your details are often shared with a wider publisher and other journals by that publisher, you might start getting a lot of invitation. I easily get 6 to 10 invitations a week. So needless to say, I am not going to accept all of those invitations. So I then start looking at, okay, this is a low versus high impact journal, meaning I may want to prioritize my time to some high impact journals where I feel that maybe the gatekeeping is even more important, or where I really want to provide a critical perspective given my expertise. So that is one thing that I consider. I also think about my ethical responsibility? So the example I gave of an intervention in my field being labeled music therapy, while it's not, while it's maybe just listening to pre-recorded music, I may want to accept that review, not per se to reject the manuscript, but to have those kind of misrepresentations corrected. Yeah. So I definitely, the ethical responsibility plays a big role in me accepting invitations or not. Then also think about the time frame. Some of those higher impact journals have a very fast turnaround. You get a week or 10 days, and you just may not have the time for it. If you're not going to be able to meet the deadline, do not accept the invitation, or at the very least, reach out to the person who's inviting you and say, I would be happy to do this, but I'm not going to be able to do it until this date. Yeah. And then they can make a decision whether that's feasible for their journal or not. Yeah. In many other cases, review turnaround might be a little longer. It might be 3 weeks or sometimes even 4 weeks. Yeah. But I would say on average 3 weeks. Of course, you want to look if you have any conflict of interest. If it's a master review process, you're not going to be able to see who the authors are. But sometimes, especially if it's a manuscript that is very close to your specific expertise, and if your specific expertise is quite niche, by reading the manuscript, the abstract, you might get a good sense of who this author group is. I often do. It's like, oh, I know that's coming from this research lab, or that's coming because you know what people are researching, who are really close to your particular expertise. You can't always be 100% sure based on the abstract. So then I will reach out to the editor and say, I think I have a conflict of interest. I believe this author theme is X, Y, and Z. So therefore, I don't think. And then I've been, not often, but once in a while I've been wrong, where the editor says, no, it's not that research theme. And I said, okay, I'll accept it. Yeah. Sometimes after you accept it, that's when you discover the conflict of interest. Do not proceed. Always reach out to the editorial team to see what they want to do with this. Yeah. So think overall, not only what is your service, what are you contributing to the field and to the journals and to the process of peer review, but also consider what are you getting out of it as a scholar. Yeah, and I think it needs to be a balanced end result where you will be able to get something out of it yourself. Okay, so what are the expectations then of the reviewer? Look at your journal's review form. So once you accept, you'll be able to have access to the reviewer's portal, right? Go look there what your instructions are. So don't immediately start reading the manuscript and do your whole review only to then figure out, oh, they have this very lengthy list of questions that I need to answer about all these very specific details. And I didn't pay attention to that when I was reading. Yeah. So always go look first, whether it's a very structured review or whether it's unstructured. Most journals have a combination. They have a certain set of rating questions where you may need to rate the quality of the manuscript on very particular areas. And then they have the whole open-ended box where you can write your narrative review. Yeah, but you want to know those questions beforehand. Make sure that you review the manuscript for content and scientific rigor. Do not copy edit. That's not your job as a peer reviewer. Yeah, I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. Expect to review revisions. It's very rare that a manuscript only gets one round of reviews. Yeah, unless it's a very strong manuscript, you gave it minor revisions, the other reviewers give it minor revisions, and the editors feels that the revised manuscript does not need to go back to peer review. I will say that editors are being increasingly careful not to overburden reviewers with reviewing a minor revision manuscript, because it's been so hard to get reviewers since COVID, quite honestly, that we want to use you for looking at important things, examining, evaluating the scientific rigor of a manuscript. And if I just get minor comments back from you and the authors do a good job responding to those minor comments, I don't want to burden you, your time again. But in many cases, your first decision might be major revisions. Yeah. Then expect that a revised manuscript is going to be sent back to you. And I beg you, once you agree to review a manuscript, please see it through all the way. Do not then say when the next revision comes in or invitation comes in, I already reviewed it. I already gave my comments. Why would I want to do it again? It is extremely problematic in a peer review process if the original reviewers do not accept, because you can imagine you give your critical feedback on a manuscript. And the reason why we have 2 or 3 reviewers is because different people bring different perspectives and different critiques. So now I can't rely on you again. So now I need to invite you, and you are most likely going to bring some new critiques. And you can imagine if this happens with every round of review, that authors get very frustrated of getting new critiques, because the peer review process is subjective. Yeah. And people will bring their very own things that they feel are really important, to in the way things are reported or in a way a study is conducted. And 2 reviewers might disagree with each other. Yeah. So please, if you accept, try to do your very best to accept an invitation to review the revision of a manuscript. When you write your review, please know that the other reviewers will most likely see your review comments. After the decision is made, you'll get in your inbox the decision letter. And if you scroll down, you should be able to see the review from the other reviewers. Some journals still don't do that, but I would say probably 80 to 90% of journals do that now. So think about that when we get to the next section about constructive criticism. Watch your tone, be always professional, because other people will also be reading your reviews. Yeah. And then just be mindful of your ethical obligations. You must treat all the materials you receive and review as absolutely confidential. You cannot talk with other people about a manuscript that you're reviewing. You cannot just share information with others or start consulting with people and say, hey, can you read this manuscript as well? What do you think about this? Yeah, we'll talk about an exception to that. But in general, you really need to keep everything confidential. Yeah. And then please submit your review by the deadline so that you don't unnecessarily prolong the review process. Here's my big do not copy edit again. Keep coming back to it, but it's so important because it's such a time-consuming task to copy edit. And we need your skills not to copy edit. We need your skills to review the scientific rigor of a manuscript. Yeah. All right. So as I said, before you start doing your review, try to obtain the criteria that the journal has for review process. And then I like to do a very, very cursory review to get a sense of the quality of the manuscript. And most likely, I don't even spend a lot of time in my cursory review reading the background section. I typically just go to I look to the purpose statement, typically at the end of the background section. I read the abstract, purpose statement. I do a cursory review of the method section. and I do a cursory review of the discussion section. When I see a lot of red flags in the method section, significant underreporting, so they're not following scientific standards for reporting of randomized controlled trials, for example, and a lot of crucial information is missing, or the design that they chose is really not allowing them to answer the research questions that they posed. And then the discussion section is completely overreaching in terms of, it doesn't look like it's based on the results that they obtained. When I see all of those red flags, I already know that I'm not going to spend 3 or 4 hours doing a good, detailed review of the manuscript. Instead, I'm going to already immediately lift up these major issues that I'm seeing, and I'm going to, make a decision of reject and justify my decision of reject by these several major issues that I noticed. There is no use going into a very detailed review of the background section and picking every sentence apart that they write and not agreeing with a reference that they cited if the study is not even solid in terms of study design, or the statistical analyses are extremely problematic. Yeah, so be smart with your time. But I would hope in the majority of the cases, that's not going to be needed, right? You do a cursory review, you get a sense of, okay, this looks like decent enough. Now you're going to do a detailed review. I typically read and through the manuscript, and everybody, I'm sure, has their own way of doing this. And at the end, hopefully, we have some time to talk about people's preferred practices. But I like to have the PDF up. I read it, and I make just with comment bubbles. I already add comments of maybe things that I'm noticing, things that I'm questioning. And I find it easier to have it marked in the PDF, while at the same time I have a Word document open and I start just with bullet points, writing out some of my critique. But I do it rather quickly, to get a good sense, okay, what are all the major issues here? By marking the PDF at the same time, sometimes it's with a comment bubble, sometimes it's with my highlighting tool, I can easily go find those spots again. If I then, once I review my review and I feel like, I probably need to give a little better justification here, or, what are some suggestions I could offer to the author? It makes it easy to be able to find those things in the PDF. Yeah. Try to decide whether the problem, if there is a problem, if the problem is bad methodology, bad research versus bad reporting. Yeah. It's not always possible. If they don't report enough, you may not have enough information to make a decision whether the methodology is solid. But sometimes you can see, for example, they'll say something like, participants were randomized to the 2 treatment arms on a 1-to-1 ratio, and that's all you get. You don't get any information about allocation concealment, about the type of randomization method that was used. That to me seems like bad reporting. Yeah, they just didn't report on it either because of word count issues, or they didn't think it was important to report on it. But again, if I see a study design that does not match the research question that they're asking, that's bad methodology. And that's, of course, much more problematic than bad reporting. So I try to make that distinction as much as I can when I write my peer reviews. Make sure that you write your comments always, always, always in a Word document or whatever you prefer. Do not write it directly in the online submission form, because it might time out on you. And there are all your comments. I cannot tell you how often, as an editor-in-chief, I get a peer reviewer to email me, hey, is there any way that you can recover my, I almost completed it, and I got timed out, or I stepped away, came back, my computer, went into sleep, and now I need to log in again, and it's not there. And if that reviewer didn't hit save, there's nothing I can do. All right, so please write it in a Word document first. The other thing, I like to have my own Word document when I'm then being asked to review a revision, that I can quickly say, okay, what are all the critiques that I gave? You can go find it in the system and their response letter, but I like to have my version right next to the revised manuscript. Here is an example, might be a little small, but of instructions that you might get. It gives you instructions of what a review statement typically will include, but then it gives very specific questions. It says, in writing the evaluation, it is useful to keep in mind the following questions. How important is the topic of the manuscript and how relevant is it for the journal? How adequate is the manuscript conceptually and in terms of methods? Are the arguments relevant and the structure well organized? Is the language correct or even enjoyable? How useful are the results likely to be for scholars within interdisciplinary fields of music therapy? So this is for one of our journals in my field. And if, in your opinion, the manuscript deserves to be published, do you have any suggestions about changes to be made to the manuscript, and so on? Yeah. So those are very kind of general guidelines that you might see. Any questions so far? I'm going to go into some things to consider of the specific sections of the manuscript. Yeah, you're looking for questions online. Okay, good. So start your review with a few summary sentences. This is not needed for the author because, of course, they know what their manuscript is about. This is needed for me or for the associate editors, right? We are not always going to read the whole manuscript before reading your review. Yeah. Typically, I'll read as an associate editor, I will have read the manuscript once to decide whether it should go to peer review. But that might have been, a month ago. And we deal with a lot of manuscripts. So kind of, refresh my mind. What is this paper about? Then situate the findings in the context of current knowledge. Does it, contribute any new knowledge, or is it the same old? Because then if so, we probably don't want to publish that, right? Summarize the major strengths and the major weaknesses. Summarize. So just like maybe one sentence with a seriation of the really top major weaknesses and the top major strengths. Yeah, so don't go in great detail. You will go into great detail in the next section. So the summary is just a few sentences, might be 3 or 4 sentences. Then, and do make sure in the summary to say something positive. Really, even if it's a bad manuscript, try to say something positive. Like maybe the problem or the thing that they're writing about is important to your field. Yeah, and I might say something. I started reading this manuscript with great enthusiasm because of the significance of blah, blah, blah. Unfortunately, several major weaknesses or issues greatly diminished my enthusiasm for the manuscript. And then you go into what those are. Yeah. So state what the major flaws are, clearly articulate the flaws, and explain how they impact the scientific rigor of the manuscript. So don't just say, oh, this is a problem, this is a problem. Just, say why it is a problem. Yeah. Don't just name it, but say why. And then, if possible, offer suggestions for revisions. Now, I say that with a grain of salt. It is nice as an author to receive some possible suggestions. However, it's certainly not your job to rescue and fix the manuscript. Yeah, but you may say something like, let's say you have a problem with the statistical analysis, right? I suggest that you don't just write, this statistical analysis is unacceptable. That's not helpful to say why, and then offer some suggestions, but do it carefully, and say, I'm wondering if the team considered using I don't know, multiple regression instead of, because it might better answer the question that, and so you offer a solution and you give a rationale for your solution. Yeah. Offer your comments in a logical order, even though as you read through the manuscript, you might start writing down, initial comments, and then you read it carefully, and then you start adding more. Make sure that all the comments for the background section are together, all the comments for the methodology are together, so that poor authors don't have to jump from page 34 to page 1 to page 32 to page 2, So try to offer them in a logical order. So now for the specific section, some things to consider is, of course, with recent literature included. If they're only including old references, that's problematic. However, please don't be one of those reviewers who categorically reject any reference that is older than 10 years, because maybe they're referencing a very seminal work that should be referenced. Yeah. Has similar work already been published that the authors didn't acknowledge? This happens a lot. So hopefully you are quite knowledgeable about the literature. And if not, you might want to do a little search yourself. Like if they make a really strong statement, no studies have ever looked at this problem before, I don't tend to take them for their word. I do a search in Medline, or I do a Google search to see, is that correct, really? And lo and behold, you often will find some studies that have been done. And if you find a study that has been done, look at when their submission date was, and then look on if that study was published after they submitted. That's not quite fair, but I might still say, since your submission, this study has been published, and probably would be great to incorporate this in your background section. Yeah. Look for any biases, and look also whether the authors provide a clear and sound rationale, of course. I would hope that you know to look for that. In the methods section, is the main question addressed by the research? Was it addressable by the chosen design? I keep reiterating that, but that's unfortunately often a common problem. Is the methodology appropriate for the stated research questions? And does the methods section meet scholarly standards for peer-reviewed scientific journals? And with that, I mean, are they reporting what they're supposed to be reporting? And is the research of a level that you would anticipate, for whatever level journal you are reviewing? For reporting guidelines, you can consult the concert guidelines, the trend guidelines. So there's many reporting guidelines for different types of study designs. Please know that many journals now require that authors submit a checklist, for example, the concert checklist, and authors will indeed put page numbers of where they reported on these things. Unfortunately, my experience has been that editorial teams do not seem to look at that before the manuscript goes out for peer review. And as an author, you cannot assume that if an author says, yes, I did this on page 18, that they actually did it. A very, very common issue that they'll write, yes, I reported randomization method, and they didn't. They only reported that they randomized, but they didn't include the method they used. Or they say, yep, reported on allocation concealment, and it's just only one sentence about randomization. There's nothing about allocation concealment. Yeah. So do your due diligence and make sure that things are indeed reported. We already talked about the analyses, statistical analyses, qualitative analyses. So of course, make sure to look whether those were sufficient. If you do not have the skill or expertise, let's say they are using a statistical analysis that you're not very familiar with. Yeah, you learned about it in grad school, but you never use it anymore, so you don't quite know. you don't have to per se report on that in the review itself, but at least in your confidential comments to the editor, make sure you write it there to say, I was able to review the methodology. I'm an expert in this particular health problem. However, the statistics were beyond my expertise area. So please have somebody else review the statistics. Okay. And then for the results sections, check on whether the results are reported in sufficient detail and if the results section doesn't have any errors. This is also a very common issue that the data in the table, for example, does not match the data in the narrative. Yeah, might be an honest typo, or it might be that they were fumbling with the data reporting. Yeah, degrees of freedoms become often like, what? How does your flow chart? You have so many people who you lost, how can you have this degree of freedom given this flow chart? So look through the sections. Yeah, if they say that so many participants enrolled, so many, were analyzed, are the results sections actually matching that? Tables and figures. Some authors love to throw in tables and figures. Yeah, most journals have a limitation, but not all journals, right? Or the journals might have a limitation that's quite high, like maybe 10 tables and figures. Sometimes the figures or the tables do not add anything. So dare to make a comment on that. Or the opposite might be true. You get a lot of narrative text in the results and they're hard to read, where you say, it would be so helpful to have a figure here or a table here. So you can certainly ask for that. All right, then discussion section, are the conclusion consistent with the evidence and are arguments presented? Yeah, they might be drawing conclusions in the discussion section that are too rose-colored. Yeah, they're overemphasizing all the positive findings, but they're kind of trying to push under the rug or sweep under the rug any null findings or any findings for which they don't really have a good explanation for. Yeah, so really have that results section open next to you, have that discussion section open maybe on a different screen, and do a careful check through to make sure that all the results are being adequately addressed in the discussion section. Yeah, and that they're not overreaching. Yeah, that's also a very common issue. Then does the author situate the current findings within the context of existing knowledge? Sometimes authors take the results and they contextualize them within the results of their own study. And it's very like insular, as if nobody else has done anything. And so as a reader at the end of the discussion section, it's like, okay, so this study showed that this and this is true, but what new knowledge? You need to help me connect it as a reader to the extant literature and help me understand what is now the new knowledge that was contributed by this study, right? So look for that as reviewers. This is often the harder thing for authors to do, or maybe they get tired by the time they write their discussion section. Yet it's crucial, yeah? So make sure to ask for those kind of things. And then, of course, are all important limitations addressed? But also dare to point out where limitations don't make sense at all. I often see in qualitative manuscripts as a limitation the sample size, and that results weren't generalizable. And I'm like, sample, why would you pose that as a limitation? A qualitative study, by nature of being a qualitative study, is going to be small in sample size because we're not looking to enroll a large number of people so that results can be generalizable. So I think those have become such standard things that people write. The study had several limitations, small sample size, not generalizable, not. So make sure that the limitations make sense given the research approach. Yeah. And then are the recommendations that are offered relevant and appropriate, of course. So when I write my review in all that I just reviewed or listed, I write mostly major issues. Yeah. And I tend to keep minor issues for the end of the manuscript. Yeah. So there I might list minor methodological critiques that I have, yeah, or issues around the structure of the manuscript, or issues around language. If language issues are significant, you can put it under your major concerns, yeah. And so now we're coming to the issue of copy editing. I said over and over, do not copy edit. However, that does not mean that you can't make comments about language errors. So if the manuscript has a lot of language errors, you can note that and you can offer a few examples, especially if there are consistent errors that keep coming back. Yeah, drives me nuts when I see the mistake of possessive s's, its versus its, yeah, or plural versus singular possessives, and mistakes. I'm not going to copy edit and say on page 3, line 79, you have this mistake. And you just say throughout the manuscript, there are a multitude of issues with use of possessive s. And I may give 1 or 2 examples. Yeah. That's the kind of copy editing that you should be doing. You can, if you see a consistent issue appearing, you can name it, and that's it. Yeah. If the language issues are all over the place, you note it and you just say that the manuscript could benefit from very careful copy editing. If it's clear that the writers or the author teams that their native language is not English, and that so the maybe the awkwardness of the writing or language errors are due to ESL writing, please, as an ESL speaker, I'm asking you, I'm begging you to be very respectful about that. And as an author, I think it's always nice to be able to read maybe a comment like, I applaud the authors for writing in a language that is not their native language. This is extremely challenging to do. However, there were significant issues throughout the manuscript, which at times made it hard for me to understand the intended meaning. Therefore, to further improve the manuscript, I encourage you to, so to hear, I'm respectful. I respect the fact that they're writing in a different language. And I also acknowledge how the English language dominates the scientific literature, right? And why should people be writing in English? I guess, we need to decide on a language that we can all read and understand, across countries. But it is very unfair to people, or researchers for whose native language is not English. Yeah. If you have excessive citations or excessive quotations, some reviewers and authors in their background section get extremely lazy and in the discussion section. And it's quotation after quotation just because they don't feel like paraphrasing. Those kind of things, you can call out as well. Okay. I wrote a comment about APA or AMA in between parentheses, because I feel that's a copy editor's job, not really your job. But if you see a lot of APA issues, I guess you could name it, but I would say your time is better spent with other things. So overall, offer constructive comments, try to be polite, yet honest and direct. Yeah, a manuscript is not helped with very flowery comments if the manuscript is actually quite bad. Try to be objective and constructive, not subjective and destructive. Yeah, these authors did spend a lot of time, hopefully, writing this manuscript. Dare to be critical, though, especially when you're a novice reviewer. You have to dare to be critical, because nothing is worse for an editor to receive a recommendation of reject or major revisions, yet the review comments are all positive. Yeah, or only note like minor things. How can I then justify my decision as an editor to reject a manuscript if you're telling me to reject, right? Authors don't get to see the bubble that you select. They don't know how many reviewers said reject versus accept. They only get the review comments. Yeah. And if your comments are all positive and the next reviewer's comments are all positive, yet you're all recommending reject, that makes it very difficult. Yeah. So try to be, dare to be critical. Think I've noticed most of the other things. Oh, dare to state when something is outside of your area of expertise. I gave these statistics as an example, but there might be something else that you feel like, you know, you're not the best person to review that particular part of a manuscript. And never, ever, ever require citations of your own work. Even if you think you wrote the most important book, you cannot require citations of your own work, as that is self-serving. Okay. When you then, just some very practical things, I like when reviewers number their comments, makes it easier for the authors to respond to reviewer number 3, comment number 10, and reviewer number 2, comment number 3 are really similar comments. So people put them then together in their response letter, but they can clearly reference it. Also, as an editor, when I then review the reviewers' letters, it makes my job much easier as well. Yeah. Indicate whether your comments are your own opinion or whether they're reflected or supported by the literature. That's also important. Try to avoid emotive language. Never use bolded text, all caps, exclamation marks. None of that is needed. Yeah. And I start sometimes writing quite strongly if I feel very passionate about something that's really bad about a manuscript or unacceptable. After you complete your review, walk away from it. Wait till the next day to submit it. Read it again. And it's so often in my own reviews that are like, okay, you can write that you can be a little kinder. You don't have to use this word. What would be a better word? I so often soften my language without shying away from my critique, but I just try to receive it now as an author. How would I be receiving a comment like this? And then, when you do reviews, you will then enter your narrative, you copy and paste it into the comments to the author. There's always a section, comments to the editor. That is where you can note maybe an area of expertise that you don't have, that you feel is necessary for the manuscript. But please do not use that box to now unload all of your critiques and then upload a positive letter for the author. Because those confidential comments, as an editor, I cannot pass on to the author. And it does not help me make a decision if your most important comments are actually in my confidential box because you were too afraid to voice them. Yeah, so very important. So the type of recommendations that you can typically select are reject, right? Accept without revisions, or revise. Major revisions or minor revisions. Yeah. Again, please know that in most cases, as an author, you don't get to see what people recommend, nor should you put that in your narrative. So please don't write in your narrative, therefore, I recommend rejection of the manuscript. You are being asked to select the radio buttons for a reason. Yeah. Don't put it in your narrative. but make sure that your narrative matches your ultimate decision. Yeah. Your time commitment, on average, research shows that it takes a seasoned reviewer 2 to 4 hours per manuscript. A novice reviewer might even spend 8 to 10 hours. Now, don't let that scare you away. Yeah, it's really initially, because as a novice reviewer, you're probably going to feel quite hesitant. Like, can I write this? Am I right? Let me look it up. And I want to critique this about the statistics, but do I recall this correctly? And you may want to do, some additional research to make sure that you are correct in in the opinion that you want to express. And that becomes less and less as you get more experienced as reviewer. Okay. As a novice reviewer, you can certainly consult with your advisor, or mentor, or with a methodologist about something in a manuscript, but you can never share the manuscript, and your comments need to be, or your questions need to be, and I was going to say quite general, maybe not general, they can be specific enough, but you have to be careful that you don't disclose too many details that now it could give away what manuscript you're talking about. Yeah. So if you do need assistance with a review, you could also ask the editor, say, I am a novice reviewer. I wrote a critique. I'm afraid it's too critical. Could I get permission to share this with my advisor? Very often editors, as long as it's noted, will say yes to that. Yeah, because we are eager to get novice reviewers to become good reviewers. So we typically welcome that, but it is important that you let the editor know. We already talked about this. And I have the PowerPoint will be posted. I have some examples of how to offer some positive review comments. We're not going to read them all now because I want to leave some time for questions, some constructive criticism comments that you can read, some suggestions for linguistic alterations, and then lots of resources for peer reviewers. All right, questions or comments? Go ahead.
Yes, I think this one goes to.
Can you speak up so the folks online can?
All right. So this is assumed we are all reviewers.
We're all what?
We are all peer reviewers. Yeah. So what about someone who wants to be a reviewer, but then not a reviewer yet? So what's the process?
How do you get to become a peer reviewer? That's a great question. Tell your advisor or a colleague that you really would like to peer review for a particular journal. That person can then recommend you. I just actually did that with a person who I think would be an awesome reviewer for a journal, recommended that person and checked in with that person like, hey, I think you would also be a great reviewer for this and this and this journal. Would you like me to recommend you? And then I just write a message to the editor, especially for journals that I'm on the editorial board. I may say, this person would be a wonderful reviewer. Yeah, so you can also actually reach out to the editorial team, introduce yourself and say why you think you would be a great reviewer. I'm telling you, journals are so short on reviewers these days that we would welcome people reaching out to us. Yeah. Any other questions? What else are comments? Maybe things that you like to do or things that you feel are important, like Dr. Brown. I don't know if you have anything to contribute, things that you like to do as a reviewer that you think are important, or anybody else online or here, or struggles that people have experienced.
I mean, thinking back to my reviewer comments, I definitely like to just make sure that you already said this, but listing some of the positives of the manuscript. Like they have a joke, I guess, like no one wants to be reviewer number 2, where you're just coming in and you're like shredding someone's work apart. or being very opinionated. To your point, requiring, like I've received feedback where reviewers have wanted me to basically cite their research group. And that just shouldn't be a requirement of an author. You can name some other references that maybe like seminal papers that maybe you feel like should be included that maybe were not listed there, but it shouldn't be a requirement for this author to like praise your research. So big advocate of just naming, even if it's the worst manuscript you've ever read, there has to be something positive about that manuscript.
Yeah, I often get when I see papers, this was maybe more when I was in my role as an editor, sometimes we would get, the small feasibility studies. And in our journal, we just often wouldn't have the space for it. We receive, and so most journals receive a lot of submissions, right? And it's making a tough decision. You only have so many articles that you can publish per volume and so you need to make tough decisions because you don't want there to be a long waiting list for manuscripts to be able to be included in a volume or an issue because you have such a long list of articles that have been accepted. So often I would write very positive letters to these authors, like reinforcing, like doing a feasibility study or a pilot study is so important. And I applaud you for taking rigorous steps, making sure that this and this and this is feasible so that now you're ready to do your, bigger trial. Unfortunately, please know that not all feasibility studies can be published. They're all important, but they're not all to be published. And then I try to justify or help them understand why we can't publish. So it's not that their study is bad. It's not that reporting is bad. Just sometimes it's not. It's the space.
So it's funny that you use that as an example. So I just went through a review. Well, I was a reviewer, and we submitted our feedback, and it was for a paper that was a small feasibility study. They note that in the manuscript, but then the other reviewer, I'm going to say reviewer number 2 now, was like this. There's no point in me even reviewing this manuscript. You don't have a comparison group. Is reject. Yeah. The recommendation was now the editor kind of sat in the middle and ended up saying, my 2 reviewers are sitting on 2 different ends of the spectrum. This is what I kind of recommend. And she did send it back out for revisions versus rejecting it. This author was like 10 toes down. His reviewer was 10 toes down that it's a feasibility study. There's no comparison.
Shouldn't be published. Yeah. And sometimes it depends on what the feasibility study is about. If it's about a very innovative, then as a journal, we may be very happy to publish that. Yeah. So don't let feasibility studies, scare you away from publishing. But any struggles that people, or do we out of time?
We're out of time, but there was a couple of nice little comments I just wanted to yell out to you. Excellent presentation. Glad to see this was recorded. This set of slides is a keeper. Thanks, Dr. Brott. That was from Stephen Gampesha.
Okay.
And Kristen Sickley said, thank you for this very helpful presentation.
Very good. Any last comments or struggles that people want to raise or have advice on? If not, let's come back in a month or so, right?
Just about a month.
The authors of how to deal then with reviewer number 2. That's what we will be. I don't know if you all know what the joke of reviewer number 2 is. Do you? Reviewer number 2 is always the horrible reviewer, whether it's grant review or manuscript. And funny enough, I can tell you as an editor, it's often the reviewer number 2. It is so funny. So we always joke with, oh no, we have a reviewer number 2. Sometimes reviewer number 2 is all the reviewers, but it's that very, it's not per se the most critical. It's the mean, like, let's break this author team down as much as we can kind of reviewer. Yeah, that's reviewer number 2. So we'll talk about reviewer number 2 next time. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.